The title of today's message is The Mysteries of Marriage, or 10-3-2-1. 10-3-2-1. I've given you some handouts to help you follow along, to help you understand some of the letters and numbers as they relate to one another, because we'll be heavily using the letters and the numbers and pulling them out of the chapter. This chapter is all about the mystery of marriage between Isaac, Yitzhak, and Rebekah. Her name is Rivka in Hebrew. And we know that the servant, Eliezer, has been given a commission to go back to Abraham's kinsmen and to take a wife from among his own kin. And so as the messenger, he sets out with 10 camels. Now, what do you already know about the number 10? It's a minyan. Good. What is a minyan? The minimum number of a congregation. We need 10 men in order to make up a minyan, or the minimum number of a congregation. So symbolically here we might have a congregation moving along the desert. 10 is also seen as a single unit. Base 10 is like the decimal system. It's the base of a number system. So base 10 or 10 is seen as a single unit. Now, I think Eliezer is choosing 10 camels because he knows that Yitzhak's future wife is going to carry on El Shaddai's covenant promise that through Abraham's seed all the nations of the world will be blessed, that Abraham's seed will carry on as the congregation of covenant. So he chooses 10 camels for this future wife who is going to nurture the one congregation. 10 camels, a single unit. 10 men, a single congregation. Rivka, this wife that's not yet been found, will nurture that one congregation. She will pass along the promise. And we also know that a camel represents a servant. It's kind of like the train that travels through the desert carrying burdens. So we see that also the camels represent the servants of God, the tzaddikim, the righteous ones. And they are going to bear the burdens of El Shaddai's community on earth. We are here to bear burdens, just like camels of the community of believers. Now this relates back to Yitzhak. When Abraham bound the wood, the sticks for the fire, on Yitzhak's shoulders to carry up to Mount Moriah, he's doing more than just carrying sticks. Those of you who came to the Shabbat message in Mount Vernon, you've heard me say this before, so you're a little bit ahead. But Yitzhak bore the burden symbolically of mankind on his shoulders when he took those dry sticks, that wood, on his shoulders. And then there's going to be two symbols to look at in this chapter that have to do with marriage. The previous one is that Yitzhak took the wood on his shoulders. We know that in Hebrew, the word for wood is etz. Etz is singular. The same word for wood also means tree. It can also mean sticks. It covers the whole area. Etz, wood, tree, sticks. Okay? When this happens, we see that symbolically, taking this dry wood, something more than just carrying wood is happening. the etzim, or the trees, the sticks, will represent men. Men like trees walking. Remember the Sabbath? Breaker was also picking up sticks to kindle a fire of rebellion, or he was gathering and leading men in rebellion. As we know, if he had continued in his sin, he wouldn't have been the only one breaking the Sabbath. The Sabbath breaker, who was found on the outskirts of the camp, would have led a gathering of men in his rebellion. He's gathering an unrepentant fire of rebellion. That has to do with men like trees walking as well. There's a difference. But the dry tree, the dry sticks, is going to represent someone who was in rebellion, someone without hope, someone who is separate from the covenant, which is basically Ephesians 2. If you look at Yeshayahu, Isaiah 56, 1 through 8, I'm going to show you what a dry tree is. The kind of tree or etzim that Yitzhak would have taken on his back as he went up Mount Moriah. Yeshayahu 56. Thus says the Lord, preserve justice and do righteousness, for my salvation, my Yeshua, is about to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. How blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who takes hold of it, who keeps from profaning the Sabbath, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. That's the key there, the dry tree. For thus says the Lord to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths and choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give in my house and within my walls a memorial, and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will not be cut off. So the dry tree, he's saying if you're a eunuch, if you have been or have felt unfruitful, don't say I am a dry tree, because one who is a dry tree is one who is separated from the covenant. One who is a dry tree is one who is being gathered up in rebellion against the commandments of God. If you remember the woman who, she had no hope. She had no more food. She thought, I'll gather up these sticks, I'll cook my last meal for myself and my son, and we'll die. She's without hope. She's gathering up dry sticks to kindle the fire. So a dry tree, without hope, separated from the covenant, or being gathered in a rebellious fire against the commandments of God. But you remember when Yeshua healed the man in stages, he said, it's a blind man. He said, what do you see? He said, I see men like trees walking. He didn't say, I see dry trees. He said, I see men like trees walking. These are men with life. These trees have life. So what is he saying? He's saying into a spiritual realm. The very word etz is made up of an ayin, which stands for the eyes. I see men like trees. The tzadi stands for the righteous one, the tzaddik. He's saying, I see righteous men like trees walking. Except when he's saying this, he's using a plural, right? He didn't say, I see a man like a tree. He's saying, I see men like trees. Trees, ayin, tzadi, yod, mem sofit. Eyes, I see the righteous. The yod stands for life, and the mem sofit stands for ripening or maturity, ready to give birth. He's saying, I see righteous men full of life, coming to maturity, ripening. That's what he sees in the etzim, the men like trees. That's the difference between men like trees walking and a dry tree. So now you can understand that when the rule was given, if you're going to lay siege to a city, don't cut down the fruit trees, because they will bring you life and ripening later on. Cut down the other types of trees that don't bear fruit. If you want to cut those down to make your siege works, those will be dry trees. Those will be trees separate from the covenant. Those will be trees of rebellion. Those will be trees without hope. Use those kinds of trees in order to lay siege to a city. They won't bear fruit. Use those. So what you can see is when Yitzhak took that wood on his shoulders to walk up to Mount Moriah, symbolically what he's taking in those dry sticks is the judgment, the sin, the rebellion, the hopelessness, the severity of judgment. He's taking it all on his shoulders. Symbolically, he is a picture of the Messiah, taking all that sin and judgment on his shoulders. He's a picture of the Messiah. He's carrying those dry trees who were separated from the covenant. And we know the scripture says of our Messiah, surely he bore our grief and our sorrow. The grief and the sorrow are the dry trees on Yitzhak's back, prophesying of the coming Messiah, who will also take a piece of dry wood on his back and carry it up to Mount Moriah. So, as Eliezer goes to look for a wife, he has to find an Ezer Kenegdo, a helper against him. That's what Eve was called, Chava. She is a Ezer Kenegdo, a helper against Adam. That means they fit together. It doesn't mean that they're fighting all the time. He has to find that counterpart to Yitzhak that will fit. She's got to fit into the parts where he's empty. See, there'll be one when they're married. But right now it's just like this. This wife Eliezer finds is going to fit in there perfectly. And Abraham tells us that he says, don't settle for anything less than just the right person. Marriage is so important. Don't settle for the first person you see. Find the person that's going to fit like this, who is your opposite, who is your counterpart, but nevertheless united in the goal. When Rivka comes to the well, we can see that she's perfectly suited for Yitzhak. Remember, Yitzhak carried the sin and the judgment and the severity of sin on his shoulder, the dry trees. But what is Rivka carrying? The waters of mercy. She is his perfect counterpart, because remember when we talked about water everywhere, we said that a jar of clay is a picture of a man. It's a symbol of a man. And inside are treasures. We have treasures in jars of clay. We have living water in those jars of clay. Yeshua says, if I am in you, then you have a perpetual mikveh rising up in you, a perpetual baptism. You can never be made unclean. Nothing dead will ever fall in there. So when Rivka shows up with a jar of clay, she is Yitzhak's counterpart. He's got the sin and the severity, the judgment he's carrying on his shoulder, and on her shoulder she's carrying the mercy, the compassion, the loving kindness, the service, the willingness to give and to pour out the water of mercy, the living water. But she doesn't yet have living water because she hasn't had a revelation of the Messiah. She doesn't know the covenant promise. She's just being compassionate. She's being merciful. She's willing not only to serve Elohim's messenger, but also his congregation, because what does she do? She takes that jar of clay full of water and begins to pour out for the camels. 10 camels representing what? A minyan, a congregation, the community of Elohim. She says, I will take this water and I will serve you. I will pour out for your camels, for the congregation of Elohim. I will serve them this water of mercy and compassion. And Eliezer says, this is the one. This is the sign. She's the water pourer. Remember at Sukkot, Yeshua stands up and says, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and keep on drinking. Whoever puts his trust in me, as the scripture says, rivers of living water will flow out of his innermost being. So Rivka symbolizes the water pourer to mankind. But she still needs the living water. She needs to meet Yitzhak in order to become complete. Because in Yitzhak, she is going to have a revelation of the Messiah, the living Word. And Yitzhak's age at this point, how old is he? He's 40 years old. Remember, we studied the punishment of stripes, which is the number 40. That's what it's centered around. And we studied water, water everywhere. Jimmy's been teaching you about the mikvah all month long. So we know that his age is a prophetic clue that in Yitzhak she is going to find that living water that goes in her jar, not just the water, the physical water of mercy, but the living water. In that respect, she will learn to pour out the Spirit upon the community of Elohim. But together, they are going to balance judgment, Yitzhak symbolizing the judgment, the severity, and mercy, the waters of mercy. In each other, they will find balance. When you put justice on the one hand and you put mercy on the other hand, you create something called justice. If you remember, when Yeshua was crucified, he was crucified between two thieves, right? We know that they were crucified on trees. That's what the Brit Hadashah tells us. They were crucified on dry trees. On one hand, we have a very angry thief. That's judgment. On the other hand, we have another thief who is showing compassion. He's saying, leave him alone. He didn't do anything. He's very compassionate. So on either side of Yeshua's hands, we have judgment, severity, sin on the one hand. We have mercy and compassion on the other hand. We have two trees. In the middle, we have Yeshua, who is crucified to a tree. By virtue of the fact that he is crucified between them, he is bringing a balance, which is called justice. He balances those two. But we know that mercy triumphs over judgment. Is that not written?
Yes.
Mercy triumphs over judgment. What did Yeshua say to the repentant thief? Today you will be with me in paradise. Very compassionate, because mercy prevails over judgment. It stands a little taller. It weighs a little more than the judgment. If you are repentant, it outweighs the judgment. So he is bringing balance in between those two. Without mercy, judgment is very destructive. It just wants to destroy. Without judgment, mercy is equally as destructive. You've all seen kids who have no discipline. They are very destructive, and they end up hurting not only themselves, they hurt other people because they're out of balance. Mercy run rampant is just as destructive. You have to have balance. As a parent, you know that. If you don't balance mercy and judgment, then your children will be out of balance. You're constantly juggling, trying to find, because you want mercy to prevail, you love your children. You want the mercy to prevail, but it can't prevail at the expense of judgment, because justice, their perception of what justice is, will be warped. It'll be out of balance. We also, and this came this morning, and I don't know if I should show you or not. We'll wait, we'll do it after we talk about Rivka seeing Yitzhak. When she first sees him and covers her head, it'll make more sense then. But don't forget those 3 columns, those 3 trees. Mercy, judgment, with Yeshua in the center as the balance, bringing it all into unity. We know that if you look at your handout, it tells you a little bit about the letter Mem, which is Yitzhak's age. He's 40 years old. That is the value of the letter Mem. Now there is a mystery associated with Mem that we're going to talk about. But just briefly, what your handout tells you about the Mem is it symbolizes water, Mayim. It symbolizes the fountain of divine wisdom of the Torah. See how Rivka now is going to encounter the Torah when she comes to meet Yitzhak? Just as the waters of a physical fountain or spring ascend from an unknown subterranean source to reveal themselves on earth, so does the fountain of wisdom above express the power of the flow of waters from Eden above. Jimmy's been teaching you that. The stream is symbolized in Proverbs as the flowing stream of the source of wisdom. But there is a mystery associated with this letter Mem. It's the number 13 because Mem is the 13th letter of the Aleph Beit. It's written, I told you my block print's not good. It's got a little opening here and then a little yod attached to it, and it's equal to 40. Now the mystery of it, since it's 13, we have to use 2 letters. Yod, Gimel. Yod has a value of 10. Gimel has a value of 3. 10 and 3 are 13. Mem is the 13th letter of the Aleph Beit. That is the mysterious letter of the Mem. Now, if you'll go to your handout again and look over the Yod. Remember, the Yod is the number 10. It's the number of camels that Eliezer takes with him. Yod is that base 10 number. It's a foundational number. It's also the number of the commandments, the 10 words given to Israel before the fullness of the statutes were given. All 613 statutes and commandments rest on those 10, which also rests on something else we'll talk about later. Something to remember about the Yod as you look at it, it doesn't really matter whether you're using block print or like I wrote etz earlier, or cursive in Hebrew. The Yod is the foundational stroke for every single letter of the Aleph Beit. If you look at the Aleph Beit I printed on the back, you can find a Yod and every single one of those letters in one form or another. It's called a formed point. It's how you begin to form a letter, whether you're forming a Vav, whether you're forming an Aleph, see the Yod there? It doesn't matter what you're forming, you're going to find the Yod contained somewhere within each letter. It stands for the foundational level of Torah learning. You even find the yod here on the mem. We know that the mem stands for a womb as well. So this is going to represent the womb of living waters, the mikvah. Yeshua's name begins with a yod. The sacred name, the set-apart name, starts with yod, he, vav, he. I'm not going to write it out because I've got a problem with erasing the name. But this is the shortest form. This is the poetic form. Yah starts with a yod. Yeshua starts with a yod. Both of them begin with that foundation. It's a letter of creation. It should speak life to you. It has to do a lot with life if you'll read what I wrote there for you in a little more detail. So for this reason, Abraham made Eliezer swear by putting his hand under his thigh. This is a euphemism for the man's procreative organ. In other words, the source of life. The source of the promise, the physical promise, was Abraham's seed. He's saying, put your hand under the physical source of this promise, Abraham's seed. This is how the promise will come about. And there's a little play on words there too, because when Eliezer puts his yad, his hand, under Abraham's thigh, his hand is spelled like this. Yod Dalet. That's your hand. Yad. Yod Dalet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But another thing to remember about the yod, it's in some verb tenses in Hebrew, you will add a yod at the beginning of the verb, and it creates a future tense. So we can associate the yod with prophetic meanings, things that are yet to be, things that will come to pass. What we're going to find is not only is the yod prevalent in this chapter, it's going to actually contain several prophecies. It starts with the 10 camels, which is yod. And then it goes to Eliezer's hand, which is yad. They're spelled the same. It's how you vocalize them that's different. Yod, yad. It's this word right here. Yod and yad are the same. 10, hand. Okay, now remember the mystery of the mem, the 13, is made up of 2 letters, the yod and the gimel. Now we've talked about 10. Let's talk about 3, the gimel. The gimel, which is on your handout, or the number 3, is the number of benevolence, giving, wanting to serve others even though you may be rich. I'm quoting a monk here. Our sages teach that the gimel symbolizes a rich man running after a poor man to give him charity. Blessed are the poor. But this gimel, if you notice this gimel, he's got a little foot right here. He's running. They see this as a foot running toward the dalet, which is the next letter in the alphabet. The dalet is the poor man. The gimel is running after that poor man, trying to run him down to bless him. This is what our Father does for us. He chases us down to bless us. His arms are full, and He's running toward us. Yes. So we know that running, to us, more than any other physical act probably, defines your will. If you are running, you will to do it. It's a very strong expression of your will. How badly does a runner want to reach the finish line? He expresses that will with his foot. If a person wants to bless you and they run after you, they are expressing their will with their feet. The Hebrew word for running, ratz, I told y'all to holler at me if I did cursive. Resh, Rosh, same spelling, different vocalization. Your head, which is the source of your will, when you make up your mind, your head, to do something, and then Tzadi is the righteous person, running to do righteousness. Run, ratz. Feminine is ratzat. There's also the word for will, which is ratzon. Head, righteousness, tzaddik, nun sofi, which is a servant. Ratzon is the will, because when you submit your will, you submit your head to the righteousness, tzaddik, of Elohim, then you ratz to the nun sofit, to become his servant. Nun meaning servant. See, I know y'all think I'm crazy when I say every letter testifies of the Messiah, but it does. I know I don't know. I don't know how it's going. But in running, the leg is firmly in contact with the earth. When you hit, you come down hard. This is why we tear up our cartilage so often, because our will is being expressed through the running. Your soul, your desire, directly affects physical reality. What you're willing right here is hitting the earth running. You're firmly in contact. And the rabbis say the ultimate reward of that running, that ratz to the ratzon, is the ultimate revelation of God's essential light. Because that yod also, if you read your handout, has to do with the channels of light coming, let there be light, speaking light and life. And we say after each blessing, in the Aaronic blessing, after each line we say, Ken yehi ratzon. That means I affirm his will for me, that it is Elohim's will to bless me. Ken yehi ratzon. It's his will, and it's my will. I submit my will to his will, and it is his will to bless me. It affirms that blessing. Now we could also say, since we know that the Gimel stands for the rich man running to give charity to the poor man, I think it explains something that Yeshua said. It means exactly what he said. I'm not saying it doesn't mean that. I want to show you something else. Remember when he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? And didn't that always sound a little hard? Well, think about our symbol. A camel is spelled the same as the Gimel. This is the Gimel, right? Trying to be cursive. Gimel is the same as Gamal, camel. Gimel, Gamal, camel. Symbolically, the rich man running to give to the poor man. So he's playing with the words a little bit. He's saying that a Gamal A gimel, a camel, represents the rich running to give charity to the poor. So I believe he's saying it's easier for a generous rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a stingy one to enter the kingdom of heaven. And how I arrived at this, as I looked up in the concordance, the Greek words for eye and needle. And we know that it has more than one meaning. It can mean, the eye of a needle can mean a place in the path that's been worn through, that it's ruptured through. So a rich man, a gimel, or a gamal, a camel, if it is their habit to give charity to the poor, then they are wearing a path, running after the poor to give to them, and they are rupturing, they are penetrating that eye. It's easier for the rich man that's been running to give to the poor man than it is for a stingy man, because he's never worn the path through. He can't rupture through into the kingdom as a generous rich man. And we are all rich. Maybe not with our bank accounts, but we are all rich. Are we running after those who are poor in the knowledge of Elohim, with our hands open, extended, running, foot extended, wearing a path to give them the treasures of the kingdom? If you are, then it's much easier for you, the rich man, to rupture, to penetrate into the kingdom, the eye of the needle, than it is for somebody who's never holding out, offering the word. And we know Yeshua said that the kingdom belongs to the children and the servants. Rebecca, is that gimel, the gamal, the servant. She's not that poor. She says, our family has plenty. Nevertheless, she's running to give to Eliezer. She's coming as both a child and a servant, even though she lacks nothing in a physical sense. She still has to be filled in a spiritual sense. So not only did Eliezer go running after her to fulfill that promise to Abraham, we know that Rivka is the gimel, running after the needy man and his congregation to give to him. Now if we read Bereshit 24:17, Genesis, I want you to note these verbs and adverbs. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. She ran to tell her household about the news. Ran, quickly. See, this is what Eliezer's been looking for. Remember what Elohim said of Abraham? He will teach his children and his household after him. This is the attribute of Abraham. She is running to tell her household the good news. This is going to be Abraham's daughter-in-law. She has those attributes that were given to Abraham. She's perfect for Yitzhak. The passage even is going to give us a detail that seems a little strange. It says she's got this water on her shoulder, right? And then she lowers it to her hands or to her hand. Her hand. Well, that's odd. Because if you're carrying a heavy water jar, wouldn't you need two hands? I mean, you'd have to kind of balance it on your hip and try to do like this. But it's not a mistake. It's on purpose. Her hand. She's only one hand. She's the water pourer, the hand of mercy. Yitzhak, remember, is the hand of judgment. He took those dry trees. It's only together that they are going to be united. So, on one hand, she has half of the foundation of the Ten Commandments, which is how to love people. She's serving people. She knows that. On the other yard, she still needs revelation knowledge of the Messiah. Right? We got to have two hands here in order to drive. But she's running toward that ultimate reward. When she runs to serve Elohim's people, she's running straight toward a revelation knowledge of the Messiah. Yitzhak's going to fill that empty hand with an intimate knowledge of Elohim, because she's submitting her hands, pouring, and she's submitting her feet, running to the nations. She is also a picture of the Messiah, who gave his right hand and his left hand, his mercy and his judgment to the nations, and allowed them to pierce his feet as well. See, his feet expressed his will. He laid down his life. He voluntarily laid down his life for his people, for the nations. Remember, Yitzhak is 40 years old. And so as Rivka's riding along on this camel with the congregation, it says that she looks and she sees this man walking in the field. And he's praying. What a husband. He's praying for her before he ever sees her. But what she encounters is the divine Torah. And she covers her head. She gets off that camel. She gets off her high camel. She gets down on the ground where her feet, her will, are solidly on the ground. And the first thing she does, she covers her head. She covers her crown, her will, keter, her head, rosh. She submits her will to Yitzhak before they ever say one word to each other. Because she sees him in a way that we'll talk about next week. She sees something when she sees him, and it's just not a man in the field. It's more than that, just like the tree is more than the tree. The field is more than the field. Yitzhak and Rivka are more than Yitzhak and Rivka. She's now in the presence of the divine Torah, and she covers her will, her head, and submits instantly. And that's why it's good for a woman to cover her head when she is in the presence of the divine Torah. If you're reading from the divine Torah, if you're praying, it's good. I'm not giving you a commandment. I'm saying it's good to cover your head, to submit your will. Women, we get that privilege. We get that sign of covenant relationship. So we can see that there's joy in what she's experiencing by covering her head. Remember, Yitzhak means will laugh, future tense, will laugh prophetically. There's joy in Yitzhak's name. When Rivka encounters the divine Torah, something happens called Simchat Torah, rejoicing in the Torah. And she covers her head and says, I can submit to this. We dance on Simchat Torah. Dance with me, lover, the lover of my soul. I will go. I will go. Behold, here he comes. And she submits. Remember, a woman who takes her head covering off in the Torah means that her covenant's in question. Her husband is jealous. He is afraid that the covenant has been ruptured. And he takes her to the priest, who uncovers her head because he says, this is not sure right now. It's in question. Until we establish what has happened, you're not going to be able to wear your head covering. And it's only when the covenant is firmly established that she can keep her head covering in place to show that she is indeed under the will, under the covenant. The angels know this, good or bad, whether you're talking about demons or the good angels assigned to us. They watch a woman's head because they understand the mystery behind it. They know if you are properly submitted to your husband, then chances are pretty good that you're in right relationship with the Messiah, who in turn is in right relationship with the Father. And they say, either leave that woman alone, she's going to be a hard one to deal with, or they're going to say, help this woman. She's submitted. She's under the covering. Her head, her will is submitted to the Messiah, and He's protecting her. Her covenant is not in question. It's a freedom of will. Nobody told Rivka to cover her head. It exercised her free will to cover it. We also know that she's sent with a nurse, which indicates how young she was. She was too young to be sent off without her mother or a nurse. So the nurse goes with her. If we use what we know about the weaning process, we know then that probably Rivka needs at least 3 years of instruction in the milk of the Torah, right? Well, she's going to learn this milk of the Torah from Yitzhak, from her husband. And remember, 3 years is the letter Gimel, the rich man running to fill the need of the poor man. Now Yitzhak's running to her to fill that empty yad. He has his yad filling her yad. They're hand in hand. Remember, she rides on a gamal. She is the Gimel riding on the gamal when she arrives in the promised land, which is also synonymous with service. It goes back to what we learned about growing up. You grow up by serving other people. You serve the congregation. So she's riding on that congregation, riding on the camels. And now she's already begun her service ministry by watering at the well, but she's not had that milk of the Torah. Yitzhak says, well, let's go back, just like Paul did. He knew the Torah better than we can ever hope to. But he still went back through a 3-year milk of the Torah learning period once he had a revelation of the Messiah. So where does Yitzhak put her? He puts her in Sarah's tent, that tent of mercy. He puts her in there so that she can be nursed on the milk of the Torah. It's the same way that Elisha took Eliyahu's talit, and he got a double portion of the blessing, right? Well, Rivka goes into Sarah's tent. That prophetic ministry of Sarah is passed to Rivka, and what does she do? Later she bears twins. She gets a double portion of Sarah's blessing. And again, as I'll show you later how it happens, she gets a balance by bearing twins. Her name also is prophetic. If you look at the letters of her name, Rivka, or Rivka, block print. Rivka, Resh, or Resh. Resh is your head, or your will, which we know that she covered and submitted. Beit, or Veit, stands for house, or family. Kuf, it's the number 100, so it's a number of completion, but it also means holiness. What it is, it's 10 times 10. 10 times 10 is a complete number. We'll do that later when we study. Eventually we'll have to talk about Peter, and we'll talk about the Kuf and the 100. The Het is virtue, femininity, else is it? Breath. When you say the sacred name and you pronounce the he, it comes out like a breath, like the breath of life. So her name tells her story. She comes, she encounters the living Torah, the joy of the Torah. So instantly she covers her head and submits her will to that. Then Yitzhak puts her into Sarah's tent, into the house, into the family, because this is the woman who is carrying on the family of Elohim. She is passing it along. Once she stays in Sarah's tent and comes to maturity, a number of completeness, 10 times 10 being 100, then you have a holiness. You have a kiddushin, a holiness that develops. And we know that if you read the writings of the rabbis, Sarah's tent was full of holiness. At last, she is presented as a spotless bride, full of virtue, femininity. That's something I'll show you in just a second. And the breath of life. That life has been breathed into her. And that name that she has tells you that. And so, what we see here is that she's carrying on Sarah's tradition by moving into that tent. She and Yitzhak are going to be one, yad to yad. To become echad, or one, in marriage, somebody's got to give up something, right? Let's look at Abraham's name. Before his name was changed, it was Avram, right? Which means father of Aram, which is where he came from. My father was a wandering Aramaean. That's what it's talking about. Avram. He is the father of Aram. Sarai means my princess. This is possessive, and it's also masculine. My princess. Now, when their names are changed, when they come into the covenant promise, something has to happen. El Shaddai takes the yod, the 10, right? That has a value of 10, from Sarai's name. He takes it away from her. He splits it. He takes the 10, cuts it in half. He makes 2 5s, which are the letter He. Now we've taken one yod, split it, and we've got 2 heads, right? Now their names are changed. Abraham becomes a father of nations. Sarai becomes Sarah, which is princess, the princess of all nations, with a feminine ending. See, Sarai had to give up her 10 in order to give 5 of it to Abraham, so that together they could go from being just a personal promise, my princess, father of just Aram, to being father of nations, princess of the world. You see, when you give up something in marriage, it doesn't go away. It benefits both of you. It increases both of you. It widens your territory when you give up something to your partner. So now each are contributing half to the whole covenant promise. It makes you one, echad. They shared. Now, her family agreed to let her go, right? But on the other yard, they're not ready to relinquish her completely. And that's just like us. Many times our families, when they hear how much we study the Word and pray and go to service, oh, they're happy. Oh, they're really walking with the Lord. Until they start finding out the details. Well, all you ever do is go to services. All you ever do is study. All you ever do is pray. All you ever do is use these Hebrew words. What's up with that? Stay with us. I like what you're saying. I don't like what you're doing. That's what they're saying. So Rivka encounters the very same problem. What is she going to do? Because people want to hear us give lip service to the covenant, but when we start submitting our heads, when we start letting our hands be pierced and balancing the judgment and the mercy, when it starts affecting where our feet go so that we are running to do the will, then that's where the problems start, and they start pulling you back. Come back, 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 back. They want to make you think that you're out of balance when you're not. In verse 55 it says, "But her brother and her mother said, 'Let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Can you believe he said that? 10 days. Just give us 10 days with her. Afterwards, she may go. What's going to happen in that 10 days? But Eliezer understands what they're doing. He says, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." And they said, "We will call the girl and consult her wishes." Now it's on Rivka. At some point, your father is going to call you out and say, "What is your will? I know what your mother and your brother are saying to you, but I have given you a commission. I have given you a covenant. What do you want to do? Do you want to stay here 10 more days? Or do you want to get on the camel? Do you want to jump in the congregation and go to the promised land?" You'll have to make a decision. Then they called Rivka and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." Thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. See, that expresses the attribute of the Gimel, the servant running. Ratzah. Rivka Ratzah. She ran to do the will, the Ratzon. Free will. She did it herself because they said, "We'll call her and ask her." No pressure. I will. I will. I will. I will. Free will. And the reason I believe they wanted her to stay.
If you'd like a copy of this program or are interested in starting your own Messianic congregation, please write to the Olive Branch, Highway 80 East at Sally's Branch Road, London, Kentucky 40744, or phone us at 606-862-0878, or visit our website at theolivebranchonline.com.